So, dear friends, before we started, as people were with us in our lead up, our quiet time, considering the glamour of materialism before we started the technique of light, we recorded each of these slides, and they'll be shared with those who are with us online, so they have a sense of how we reached this point, the discussions that we've had previously in the focus, and this beautiful contribution from esoteric astrology to really dialogue related to this particular teaching. And let's read it again into the record. And would someone like to do that as we move forward together? Aisha, would you mind?
Sure. Owing to the world glamour, the true purpose and ideal set before our planetary forces by the all-creating will becomes distorted by many people. They are not polarized in the divine will, but as yet are as yet centered in their personalities, and hence only the few appreciate the beauty of the intended group life, group purpose, and group fusion. Group living tends to the fulfillment of free will in service and a free subordination of the lower will to the higher purpose in group formation. Through the glamour contacted, however, this group activity and life becomes twisted into the imposed will and the concept of the super state. This produces the imprisonment of the mind and the curtailment of all freedom, all free thought, and free will. The man becomes captive of the man-made state. This gives a clue to much that is happening today and to the headstrong progress of the glamoured peoples, to the stiffening of individuals in their separative wrong idealisms, and to their acceptance of the imposition of a rule of life and an order of living which is imposed upon them by force, and which is not the free expression of a free people. The same force, secondly, brings to other peoples and individuals a measure of illumination, an illumination which reveals the underlying synthesis, which indicates the dualism which must finally vanish, and which indicates also the secret of right human relations. One reaction produces the onward rush of the materialistic systems of life, thought, and desire, dashing blindly forward in the force of their own momentum and producing a stage of powerful expression and active movement. The other demonstrates in a far vision of possibility and a steady movement forward in spite of the immediate dangers and difficulties.
This is so full. It's difficult to note for oneself where when we can speak into it because it is so complete. As I have read it and reread it, the line group living tends to the fulfillment of free will in service and a free subordination of the lower will to the higher purpose in group formation. I was thinking about this in terms of the different groups that Master DK notes for us that we align with. First of all, family. And how many in humanity were in a group living situation in family that tended to the fulfillment of free will in service and a free subordination of the lower will to the higher purpose in that group formation. How many do we see who have in this day and age not had that experience in a family setting, and then definitely not in a community setting where the community life tended towards the individual and group's expression of free will in service and free subordination of the lower will, what I want to do as an individual or what my family wants to do as an individual, to the higher purpose of that larger family, extended family, and community group. And then how many of us have experienced in our work life, our careers, being part of larger institutions that were struggling with bringing the intended purpose, the group life, and the contribution of all into a group fusion. Just something to ponder. And how we're dealing now with these big institutions. On a local, on a national and international level. How can we bring free thought and free will into these institutions and a measure of illumination? That's the question I've been pondering.
May I speak to this?
Oh, everyone. Yeah, just chime in.
Okay, so yes, that sentence is very interesting, and I've read this many times myself and thought about it. So, group living tends to the fulfillment of free will in service. So, I even take this even higher that the group referring to is the soul group, our group, our soul group. So, and a free subordination of the lower will to the higher purpose in group formation. So if we live as soul, then our free will is in concordance with the greater free will, the greater will of the higher soul or whatever. I'm getting a little jumbled up here. But so it's really kind of, it's talking on all levels, of course, right? Family, our esoteric groups, but then also our inner group soul. So if we are functioning from the level of that higher soul, which we are all a part of it, then, you know, our will is service and the lower will is following the higher will. Over.
So what are the immediate dangers and difficulties for those who are attempting to function at all times in every moment of existence in concert with that soul group life?
Well, at the beginning, you referenced fear. And I think as people are fearful, it brings them down Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's difficult to function as a soul when you feel unsteady. So the visual that came to me during the quiet was we were a cluster of corks bobbing on a turbulent sea, and the waves would splash over us and we'd bob down and get wet, and then we'd pop back up again. And it kind of feels like that sometimes, that we forget or get worried and drop down and then pop back up and remember. So I think it's a matter of discernment, detachment, and coming back into that place of poise, of just riding the waves with a calm and generous spirit. That's beautiful, important reading that you're sharing with us, Joe. Thank you.
Well, I think what can happen is that we also have a whole pile of new glamours to associate with, depending upon the ray of our soul and the ray of our personality. So we just keep stepping up into more glamours to rid ourselves of.
I also see the danger of, well, the personality stepping in without really recognizing it. When we start to think about right and wrong, taking sides, and not being inclusive of also the dark and the light side of the material, of the form side. And yeah, staying thereby in the dualism without really noticing, instead of staying in the middle point and being inclusive. Yeah, that's something. In this situation in the world right now, I have to think about a lot, because there's this division on the one side, and how can we be inclusive in this obvious division and come to a soul will, a soul purpose in it? It's a kind of acrobatics for me sometimes, because suddenly I see, okay, I take sides again. I'm tending here, tending there. I'm being exclusive again. How do I come back to this middle point where I meet the group? Just some thoughts.
That word acrobat, acrobatics, and the concept of the middle way, the middle point, is maybe a very useful one when one does an evening review or when one finds oneself being drawn to criticism or a judgment of right or wrong in relation to a physical plane experience, whether it is family, community, nation, politics, religion, education, psychology, whatever. And that standing at the midpoint, which requires that Libran, the Libra, the opposite of Aries, you know, the will, that opposite sign, that point of balance being maintained, walking the tightrope, seems to be the way that we are being encouraged to unite as soul in formation as our groups form, and not be drawn off by anything other than standing at the soul point and holding those qualities of the soul in every situation, which is very challenging for many of us, depending on where we live and what we're exposed to.
Thank you for that, Joe. I'm reminded of that wonderful piece of art that Francis Donald offers us of a figure walking a tightrope. I think they have a pole that they're holding, just one patient step after another, so as not to fall into the abyss of personality, but keeping going forward with the goal in sight. And Heike, yes, yes, constant conscious awareness. Where am I polarized? What's going on for me as I'm surrounded by people expressing points of view, perhaps that are very different from mine? Can I hold them in compassion for what feels like a deeper, heavier vibration, possibly fear, certainly self-concern? Yeah, it's challenging and good, important work. I'm glad we're doing it together.
Well, I also stumbled on something else the other day, and I don't know if this is the right place for it, but Daisha, like you're saying, we're constantly moving forward, right? There's always a pressure forward and a vision. So on Teachings and Initiation, page 367, and how did we get to where we are now in terms of all of this stuff? And there's a little part there. It says, the next sequential revelation will be that of creativity, of the world of thought forms which humanity as a whole has created, and the setting in motion by humanity, and in relation to its own destiny, the law of cause and effect, or karma. So this will take us back into the very night of time and demonstrate the hope of the present era. Now, I know that's a lot just to take in reading it, because I have read this so many times, and so we talk about thought forms of creation, but really, until I read this many times, I've realized all of what is going on today has been created by the creativity of our thought forms, whether they be one side or the other side or whatever. But I just thought that was quite interesting. Over.
Well, it is interesting, and it also, I think, relates to the fact that DK gives us that, you know, all that we are seeing, experiencing on the astral plane through the astral body of humanity has been created by humanity.
Yes.
And that's the miasma, that's the and we're rectifying that karma, to bring in, I think, when one meets and one knows what one is drawn to in terms of group service, I believe there's a connection there that as we progress and align with the soul and get in touch, through our experience with the soul vehicle and our groups, we are really redeeming. And, it's the forces of restoration that are brought into play now. We may not understand it on a concrete level, how these thought forms of solution can aid and assist us. We certainly have to dissipate the glamours in group formation, and that to be able to work on the level of dissipation of world glamours. It's all so interconnected, that cause and effect, the karma. It does give hope, because each of us, as we do dissipate our own glamour, or the glamours within our families, the glamours within our communities, whatever our point of focus is, and the extent to which we can maintain that midpoint in groups, which is difficult. I mean, it's challenging. The practice of listening and listening into the essence of what's being expressed as beyond the glamour that maybe one is triggered by. At least that's my own experience of, and I'm getting practice. I get practice every day. It might be, someone that I'm very close to, sharing their materialistic expression of love for their child by an expense of a lot of time and energy and resources to create an environment that is enabling this child to sleep better. I mean, it's very interesting when you think about what you're exposed to on a daily basis and where that is and how it relates to, in this case, the essence of a love and a care that was being expressed, when one could have gotten caught up in what the glamour is, and then penetrating into how this will aid and assist this particular child to develop. It's just very intriguing to me as I contemplate on all levels these opportunities to look at karmic cause and effect, the astral plane and the mental plane, and how we're being called to use these experiences to advance in group formation and to express soul light into a particular situation.
Yes, it's all about love, and that's the conditioning energy and I basically personally see it's really increasing in the world, which allows us, of course, to see the contrast, but there's a lot more love happening everywhere, I think.
And developing into love wisdom.
I think it's not just developing, but it's underlying. And as soon as we can look behind or dissipate the distortion, we can look behind it, and we dissipate it by looking behind it. when we see the underlying forces that are just distorted, but they are still the same forces working out. It's still within the great scheme of will, love, and power. It's never outside. So it's just taking away the distortion, the glamours, dissipating them, and the truth just comes. It's already there, and suddenly we can see it.
Ben, do you want to sound your comment into the group field?
The far vision of possibility, the fulfillment of free will, the will to good, to prepare all for the return of the Christ, to have no other life intention, the will to good, to realize our greatness, to go forth, to remind everyone of their greatness, our great humanity.
And Donna, your comment.
Yeah, sorry, I was just affirming Heiki's. Is that how you say your name, Heiki? Heiki's, what she was saying, that it's the love that's behind everything, nothing grand.
And I'm going to read, because Donna had been kind enough to send it to me, from Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, page 367. It might here be noted by you, as we consider this entire subject of revelation from the angle of the initiate, and initiates are working from the mental plane, that in the initiatory process where the disciple is concerned, revelation is simply one way of expressing the constantly recurring effects of pressure forward and of vision. Throughout the entire evolutionary process, there is essentially nothing but a growing revelation. The two terms, evolution and revelation, go together. Any distinction lies within the field of revelation, or, to word it otherwise, within the various planes of consciousness, and particularly that in which the revelation is taking place. I'm going to read that sentence again. Any distinction lies within the field of revelation, or, to word it otherwise, within the various planes of consciousness, and particularly that in which the revelation is taking place. So we know from Master DK that the revelation is taking place on the mental plane. He, in the ideas and illusions group yesterday, we looked at the connection of the first stanza of the final great invocation from the point of light within the mind of God, which is the monad. Let light stream forth into the minds of men, which DK says is this activity on the mental plane where that light is coming in, and it is to reach and touch disciples and initiates for the formulation of these creative thought forms. And then the next stanza, from the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men, of humanity. And that line is relating to the astral plane and to the masses of humanity. So that is where the revelation is unfolding, the field of revelation on the mental plane within the various planes of consciousness, and particularly that in which the revelation is taking place. Go on with this. Earlier, DK said that the next sequential revelation will be that of creativity of the world of thought forms, which humanity as a whole has created, and the setting in motion by humanity and in relation to its own destiny of the law of cause and effect, or karma. And this will take us back into the very night of time and demonstrate the hope of the present era. So much to ponder, and let us continue. We meet 2 more times before the end of Taurus. And thank you so much. We'll close today so that we can attend the Middle East Vigil, and we'll share this with our fellow travelers, our fellow tightrope walkers, and just value so much the deep commitment and thought that is bringing us together. Onward to the Middle East Vigil. See you next time. Thank you all.